and this issue for a number of decades now. Something when you get to start counting in decades, isn't it? So let me turn it over to you all. And as you go around, I'd love for the people from also to do a quick intro. And also as you go through, all of you, to give us your name, your state, and if you have any questions, because one of the things we'd like this to be is a very open forum for you to ask questions of Marnie and be able to get some answers today. So if you have those, it would be great for you to say your name, your state, an area that you'd like to talk about. And if you don't have a question, still you must introduce yourself. I guess that's my arbitrary rule. You must introduce yourself and say your state, where you're from, and what you do there. So let me turn it over to whoever's next. Marisol, would you like to go?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to see these familiar names. I'm Marisol Giroux, the event manager at Also, and welcome.
I'm Courtney Katoskis. I'm the program coordinator with the STAAR project at Also.
Okay, great. I've introduced Mary, who will talk to us more later. Okay, stop administrators. Let's jump in. Hey, Tanya, you've just come on the screen, so I get to call on you.
Sure, no problem.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya. I'm from Pennsylvania. I don't have any specific questions today off the top of my head. I'm kind of new-ish, so love to listen to the combos, and I'll chime in if I have any questions. Hello, everyone.
Sounds great. Okay, next.
Hi, I'll go. I'm Lori Miller. I'm from Iowa. I'm having a bad hair day, so you don't get to see me, but I am the administrator for STOP, FIPSA, VOCA, SASP. And so I don't have any particular questions either.
Okay.
Just to listen.
All right, great. Well, something might occur to you if you don't have to say it now, but just it's fine for later as well. Okay, next.
Hi, I'm Pearl Gibson Collier. I'm the STOP administrator for Washington State, and you don't want to see my hair today. And I don't have any questions just yet for Marnie.
Pearl, it's good to hear your voice. I haven't heard or seen you for quite some time, but I remember that great trip to Washington.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, next.
Hi, this is Debbie Kane. I'm from Michigan, and it's good to see everybody and such familiar faces, which I appreciate a lot. I am the executive director of the Michigan Domestic and Sexual Violence Board and also the Division of Victim Services in Michigan. And it's just this stellar crew of people who are putting the call on, from Robin to Marisol and Marnie. Just anxious to always hear from you guys whenever I can. Always learn from you. Thanks.
Ditto, Debbie. Good to see you're here. All right, next.
Hi, folks. I'm Deb DeBear with NNEDV, and I'm off camera today because I'm recovering from a cycling accident with a shattered pelvis, but it's healing really well. I don't need any sympathy. I just need time and rest, and I'll be back on my feet before long. But I'm going to stay off camera because I'm in bed.
Oh, very good. Wish you well, Deb.
Thanks.
All right, Laura.
I'm Laura Russell. I'm the Grants Program Specialist in Oklahoma. I do rural, SASP, and VAWA.
Great to have you. No question. Okay, Deanna.
Hi, everybody. I'm with the North Dakota Department of Health, and I'm the Division Director for Injury and Violence Prevention. I'm also the STOP and SASP coordinator and some state funds for offender treatment. And we also have FIPSA, RPE, and some other state funds, visitation and exchange, and some other prevention state funds in North Dakota. So I oversee those as well. And I don't have any specific questions either.
Okay, great. Cora, I see you've just joined us with your camera.
Yes, I was waiting to jump in because my of course working remotely, the kids were just getting off the bus, and I knew that there would be some noise as they entered in. So I was waiting to join in until after that happened. But we did, I'm Cora, the state administrator for South Dakota, and we do have the multitude of grants, VOCA, FIPSA, STOP, SASP, accident visitation, crime victims compensation, all in our office. But I did have one question regarding transition to specific the LET stopped funding. They have now created virtual modules for training law enforcement. So they're, for at least the time being, they're not doing in-person training. And they were wondering how that time should be coded. One, they're creating the modules and investing time in that, but then the time that they are, they've been allotted 2 hours of live time for each law enforcement training and 4 hours of in-person scenario time with each class. So they're, for the pre-recorded modules, they're just, kind of asking us questions on how that should be coded and considered. We have asked if they were going to, have surveys completed, after the module to see how that's transitioned and how it's worked and so on and so forth as well.
Okay, so so this is an area that undoubtedly we'll also touch on, which is all the things that have kind of gotten a bit different now that we've been all working remotely, right? And so so that's, do you have that one, Marnie, about coding and everything? Okay, good, good. Anyone else to introduce?
Hi, my name is Karen Porter, and I work with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, the Division of Victim Services. And there's Debbie. I was going to say I'm here on behalf of Debbie, and it looks like she's here as well. And I work with the, and she can talk about all the different streams of funding that we have. And I'm the Director of Quality Assurance. So I'm happy to be here. I don't have any specific questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, great. Jason.
Hello, Jason Patry with the State of Wyoming, the Division of Victim Services. So we have about STOP, SASP, VOCA, FIPSA. I do have a question for you, Marnie. So we are, we just had some legislative changes that have us now paying for sexual assault exams, state exams for victims who have reported to law enforcement. So we have always paid for exams for non-reporting victims. We will now be paying for all of the exams, regardless of that report to law enforcement. And so one of the things we've considered doing in order to pay for those is to sub-award some funds to ourselves. We've never done that, although I've heard of states doing that. So if you have any advice or guidance around what it looks like to do a subaward to the state, some of the requirements around those subawards, that would be great.
Great, thank you. Good question, Jason. Thanks a lot. I bet a lot of people will benefit from that answer as well. Okay, who else? Brian Lawson. Would you like to say hi?
I'm Brian Lawson, grants coordinator with the Department of Finance and Administration in Arkansas, and I'm responsible for STOP and SASP. I'm fairly new to this position, probably about a year, and I'm still learning. So I'm looking forward to learning as much as I can.
Excellent. Okay, great. Who else? Julie or Anita? No? How about?
Well, Anita's kind of shy, so this is Pearl again. And so she works with my office, so she's from Washington State as well.
Okay, very good. There's Emma. Okay, thank you, Pearl. Emma.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emma West Rasmus, a program specialist at OVW, managing both STOP and SASP, and it's great to see some folks that I'm getting to know in my new role.
Congratulations, welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Anyone else who has not introduced who would like to?
Hi, my name's Julie Giddings. I also work with Debbie Kane and Karen Porter, and I don't have any specific questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Welcome. Okay. Has everyone introduced? Anyone else?
Except me.
Yes. Okay, Marnie, I think you should have at it and give us some opening thoughts here, and let's launch into these questions and some others as they might come up.
Sounds great. So I think most of you know me, but in case some of you who are newer don't, I'm Marnie Shiels, and I'm one of the attorneys at OVW, and I'm the attorney that works the most with the STAAR program. And I have been at OVW since 2001, so I have a lot of institutional knowledge, particularly around the STAAR program, because I've been working with this program that whole time. And it is really nice to see you all. I've missed you since we haven't had the annual STOP Administrator meeting for such a long time, something I usually look forward to. So anyway, here I am. And Robin had asked me to start off by talking a little bit about, what's different and new for STOP administrators right now. And obviously the main thing is COVID and this virtual world that we're all living in, which, you all probably know better than I do what are the challenges and changes that you're facing. But off of the top of my head, I can think about implementation planning and how hard it must be to get people together. Since you can't have your in-person meetings, I think there's some pluses to that too, that people who don't like to travel or who are in more remote and rural parts of the state might be more able to attend virtual meetings, but you have to structure them differently for virtual. Also, in some places, I know in the more rural areas, there might not be good Wi-Fi and good connectivity. So thinking about how to get people together, given those kinds of limitations. And then I think in terms of your subgrantees and what they're facing, also monitoring is challenging because that's something we have to think about too, how to monitor your grantees without being able to do in-person site visits. And then from the subgrantee side, how are their services looking different? And from your perspective as a state administrator, how can you be flexible to allow for different kinds of services? And, Emma is here sort of as one of our grant managers. And I know Emma and our other grant managers are happy to get your questions if you think of some novel thing that you've never done before. But even just things like, can you buy masks for staff that are working in person? Can you do plexiglass dividers? Can you pay for specialized cleaning, hand sanitizer? All those kinds of things are allowable, obviously provided that it's tied to our 4 crimes and to the purpose areas of the program. But for example, if you have a victim service provider that is trying to do in-person advocacy, you can pay for those kinds of things. Or maybe they're trying to do online advocacy, but they need more laptops for their staff, or they need to provide Wi-Fi hubs for their staff who don't otherwise have it in their homes. Those kinds of things, again, are allowable costs. And so feel free, if you have anything like that, to throw it out here and I can talk about allowable or not allowable, or I can think about it and come back to you. But definitely, again, that's sort of the positive, is we're seeing a lot of innovation and a lot of creative ideas. And in some cases, I think some of it might carry on, like innovation about how to do online court, for example. I think some of those innovations might be things that we learn from having had to do it that become ways to provide victims with access to courts, for example, and access to services without having to go into a physical location. So that's my 2 bits to start with. Do you want me to add anything to that, Robin, or did that kind of do what you were looking for?
Yeah, I think that's really good. I mean, you're setting the stage and opening the door now. And if you'd like to maybe address a couple of the questions that, that came in, and then we can see if you trigger anybody else to ask something else.
Yes, so I'm going to start with Jason's question because I agree with Robin. I think that's a question that other people might be interested in. And yes, that is a common thing. Other states have done this, given subawards to themselves. I would say a few things about that. One is that you're not competing generally when you do that. So you should have some justification just for the file, not that we need to see, but just in case you're asked, that explains what was unique about the situation where the best thing was just to subgrant it to yourself and it didn't make sense to compete it. Like, you're the people that are in the position to pay for SANE exams. And so it doesn't make sense to compete that type of thing. In some cases, I've seen it where the STOP administrating agency is something like the state police, and they want to do training for all police, and they are the entity in the state that trains all the police. And so that's their non-compete justification, basically, is we're the entity that does this, and therefore we're subgranting it to ourselves to do this training. And then the other thing is you'll need to treat it as a subaward for all intents and purposes, meaning that how you track the money, how you obligate the money, how you report on the use of funds, all those kinds of things will be the same as for any other subaward, whether it was to you or to a different entity. Does that help? And does that answer your question?
Jason, what do you think?
Yes, I believe so. I don't have any follow-up questions yet.
I actually
yes, I think you did answer my question.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And I actually have a small little follow-up tweak question on that one, is that if your state law doesn't allow it, then you can't do it, right? I mean, we're not talking about any kind of preemption thing. So you always have to be paying attention to what your state laws provide. Make sure you follow those to the letter, and don't think you get a free walk on anything just because you're using federal money, right, Marnie?
Absolutely, yes. That's always the case. I'm just referring to under the rules of the STOP program, as it were, the laws and regulations, it is allowable, and that's how it would play out.
Great. Yeah. So it's always, states have so many different qualifications around that sort of thing. It might be dollar limits or other hoops you have to jump through. But that's great. Okay. What about anybody have a follow-up on that?
I'm going to do a little follow-up just to clarify what I think you were asking, Robin.
Okay.
It's not so much, I think, that you would be likely to have a state law that says you can't subgrant to yourself, but more the issue of the non-competitive funding, and that there might be dollar limits or restrictions on non-competitive funding. So making sure that you look to whatever your procurement laws and rules are within your state, and that you also are following those as always.
There you go. That's exactly where I was headed on that. So thanks for that. Yeah. Anybody got any questions further to that?
I do have one.
Yeah.
Okay, so since we are subawarding to ourselves, we won't be using admin. It's going to be pass-through funds. And so those pass-through funds then meet all of the other VAWA requirements, such as percentage of set-asides, sexual assault requirements, all that kind of stuff. Yes. Okay.
But I should add, you're making me think, I was thinking about the question in terms of, can you subaward to yourself, but I wasn't thinking about the fact that you're talking about paying for SANE exams. And so I'm sure you know this already, but I just want to make sure to cover it in case there's others here that are newer. There's a certification requirement around payment of forensic exams. I'm turning to my statute book if you're wondering why I'm looking over there. So one of the requirements that's part of that certification is that you can only use STOP money to pay for exams if you meet 2 different requirements. And one of those requirements is that the victim cannot be required to bill, to submit the charges to his or her own health insurance. So it can be an ask, but not a require. You know, we'd like you to submit it to your health insurance. It saves us money. We can help more victims that way. But not, you have to do that and we only pay the difference. So if that is the case, then you can't use STOP funding. If it's the case that you require insurance billing. The second one is that it has to be a specially trained examiner, and it doesn't have to be a SANE or any particular licensing or certification, but it can't just be the random ER doc and you're paying for that with STOP funds. It has to at least be somebody that has some sexual assault training. And on that note, I'm going to toot my own horn because we have a new product out that I've been working on with the International Association of Forensic Nurses. I can try to find the link to it later, but it's called When There's No SANE in Sight. Or perhaps Marisol or Courtney or Mary, one of you can find it. It's on the IFN, International Association of Forensic Nurses website, When There's No SANE in Sight. And it's a 2-hour online interactive training for people in hospitals that don't have SANEs, whether it's just too rural or they haven't been able to set one up yet. It's sort of, this is the baseline of the minimum that you should know before you see a sexual assault patient. And so it's like trauma-informed response and neurobiology of trauma and some like sexual assault 101 and the basics of like, what do you do in the exam?
Wonderful. And Mary just posted that. Thank you, Mary. What a great resource. Thank you, Marnie. And for all of you who worked on it. Okay, anybody have a question or follow-up? We can actually stay on this trail a little bit. We'll get to your questions from the intro. Anybody want to ask a follow-up on this trail we're on now, Cora?
Yeah, so we have a state statute that requires that requires the county to pay for the exam that from any SANE that provides the exam, whether or not charges are filed. So each hospital is required to submit the bill to the county. Then if the victim is okay with it being submitted to insurance, they can, but otherwise it shall be submitted to the county. The verbiage on our language doesn't clarify what specifically entails the exam. Some counties interpret that to be just the kit and anything surrounded directly to the kit. But some counties interpret that as if there was an act of physical violence associated with the sexual assault that caused other injury to the body, let's say a broken arm or a punch to the face that caused facial fractures, so on and so forth. So the range of that counties are covering is pretty wide. One of the challenges is specifically when it comes to prophylaxis and the treatment, because for example, VOCA funding specifically provides that it has to be that time frame immediately after the event. So a lot of times what a doctor will do is they might give a 7-day treatment to the victim, but then they give them a prescription to fill later. And if they don't, then it's not covered under the treatment of the exam. If I'm off, if there's any questions, you can certainly stop me where I'm at too. But so when it comes to STOP funding on what they would cover for an exam, is there specific language to what is coverable by the exam?
Marnie?
Yes, there is. And that is a great question. So you made me pull out my regulations. I should have had this all ready to go beforehand. So there is a definition in the regulations. It's 28 CFR 90.2C. If any of you are legal types that like to look at the actual law. And what it says is that the term forensic medical examination means an examination provided to a victim of sexual assault by medical personnel to gather evidence of a sexual assault in a manner suitable for use in a court of law. The examination should include, at a minimum, 1, gathering information from the patient for the forensic medical history, 2, head-to-toe examination of the patient, 3, documentation of biological and physical findings, and 4, collection of evidence from the patient. So, and then it goes on actually to say any costs associated with those items I just listed, such as equipment or supplies, or sometimes there's a room fee. Those are also part of the forensic medical exam. And so those things I listed, and Mary, it's 28 CFR 90.2C, the C in parentheses. So all of those things are what the state or other governmental agency, in your case, the county, is required to pay for. Then it says the inclusion of additional procedures, e.g. testing for sexually transmitted diseases, may be determined by the state, tribal government, or unit of local government in accordance with its laws, policies, and practices. So the idea is the things that are part of the more forensic aspect, so the history, the head-to-toe exam, documentation of findings, collection of evidence, you have to pay for those. The things like treatment of injuries, the STI testing and prophylaxis and treatment, we would encourage you to cover it, certainly, but you don't have to. And you know, it's interesting that you mentioned victims' compensation, because a lot of states use victims' compensation for at least some piece of their forensic exam payment. In many states, they use it for the whole ball of wax, but they set aside a separate funding. Like I know Iowa used to do this. There's somebody on here from Iowa, so if you want to correct me if I'm wrong, but where they took the comp money and created a sexual assault exam fund, basically. And so the sexual assault payment would go to that fund, and then it didn't have the, you know, timing of reporting and requirement to cooperate with police and all those things that often go with victims comp. And actually in the OVC victims comp regulations, it specifies that for the purpose of medical forensic exams, the fact that she got the exam counts as cooperation with law enforcement. And so for comp purposes, there isn't a need for further cooperation. And that way, you're sort of meeting that comp requirement, or you can meet the comp requirement and at the same time meet the requirement for paying for forensic exams, regardless of whether or not the victim cooperates with police. Just another thing.
Let me draw attention to the chat here. Mary has posted that citation, as well as information about Iowa's sexual assault exam payment program. So thank you. Great.
Thank you. And I know Iowa's just one that comes off the top of my head, but I know there's other states that are like that as well. But wow, I'm impressed, Mary, that you were able to lay hands on Iowa's that quickly.
He's good. He's really good. Yeah.
Just think of me as your personal research assistant, everyone. Happy to do it.
A great team. A great team. Lori says, thanks for thinking of Iowa. Well, you made an impression, Lori. Let's face it. Very good.
Well, so the other thing I was going to say about this is a few more things, actually. You shouldn't have got me going on forensic exam payment, because this is like my top level of expertise is on forensic exam stuff. A lot of states every state is different in terms of how they handle it. And so while most states, at least, it is cohesive across the state, there are other states like what you described, Cora, where it's handled at the local level, and then every county is different. And I've seen it even where it's a different entity in each county. Like in one county, it might be the police department, in a different county, it might be the prosecutor. And it's most typical, I think, among those states that law enforcement is the payment source, which I personally find a little bit problematic because they sometimes don't want to pay for cases that aren't in their jurisdiction, whether it's because the victim is not reporting or because it is a Indian victim and a case that happened on a reservation. And that's a whole nother complication if you want me to get into that one for those of you that have Indian country in your states. I can if you want to, but it's very complicated and I don't have to go there.
And we only have an hour.
Right, exactly. Half an hour left. I see a follow-up about medication. Before I get to that, Emily, I just want to say one more thing, and Mary, you can put this in the chat. There is a TA project. It has changed for those of you that might be familiar with EVAWI as the TA provider on forensic exam payment. They did not get refunded in fiscal 2020. And in 18, we funded the International Association of Forensic Nurses for that TA purpose area for the forensic exam payment TA project. And in 2020, it was decided that we don't really need two different TA providers on that. And the IFN one was more successful in the peer review. But I would encourage you to look at their website if you have any TA needs around sexual assault forensic exam payment. I think they're really on the ball. And one of the things just in the 2 years they've had the project that they developed is a interactive map type thing where you can click on it and it has the laws, regulations, policies, practices for each state on how they handle forensic exam payment. So if you're curious what's there for your state, I encourage you to check. And if you find anything wrong, let me know or let them know so they can correct it. But also, if you want to see what other states are doing, then you can play around and look at their states. They also have the billing codes, which is one of those things I've always found mysterious, but they actually list what are the common codes that are used for billing. There's both procedure codes and diagnostic codes, and they have information on both of those. So it's a really useful website. So sorry, I'm blathering on quite a lot, but Emily, did you want to ask your follow-up about medication?
Yeah, so should we just follow up with our state agency that administers victim compensation? I actually just sent a question to my program administrator about there's a subgrantee that wants to charge it to prevent out-of-pocket costs, like the pre-cost before to fulfill prescriptions and stuff before they're able to process the victim compensation. So is that something that internally within the state, like the different counties are going to cover it kind of differently? There's not like a blanket statement for covering medication versus not.
Like I said, it really depends on the state, and I would encourage you to talk to your comp administrator in your state. Okay. I know when the VAWA 2005, I think, that added this requirement, added the requirement about victims not having to participate with law enforcement as a condition for forensic exam payment. And so we had the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault as the TA provider then, just kind of really starting off to see what does this look like. And Virginia was one of these states. They had pilot states, and Virginia was a pilot. I think North Dakota was a pilot, and maybe one other. And Virginia's was one of these states that was doing it at the local level. And as part of that investigation, they realized that comp was a lot better way to go, and they shifted it to victims comp.
And just to clarify, since I opened up the can of worms on this one, our compensation program does cover costs if they report to law enforcement. So our legislator we haven't brought it yet to legislative to change that to accept when there's a state exam. So the benefit to having all of, to receiving all the funding for VOCA and STOP and SASP and everything is that we're working kind of holistically to try to close some of those gaps. So one of the things that we're proposing is for those shelter programs or any recipient that receives VOCA, that we encourage the SANE nurse to encourage the victim to check in at a shelter program because they do provide sexual assault services as well. And so they can use VOCA when they haven't reported to law enforcement. They can use VOCA funding for some of those other expenses that weren't covered under the exam, or because they didn't report to crime victims compensation. So we're trying to think outside the box on those continuation of services once they leave the hospital, because we do want to encourage them to connect to those other services. So that's one way we're kind of doing in the meantime until, we are able to propose any changes legislatively. So. Great.
Thank you, Cora. That's great. And let me also note that Mary has posted the International Association of Forensic Nurses TA site there, safeta.org, and also information about when a sexual assault occurs in one state and then the exam happens in another state from MINCASA. So there's some great resources. I almost think Courtney and Marisol, these are some really excellent resources, and maybe we can share them in some kind of follow-up with people too. Because this was a great, a great question, opened up a lot of thoughts and a lot of resources for people. And Debbie notes that Michigan changed out state comp legislation to where did, I'm sorry, oh, there we go, to waive law enforcement requirements when it's a sexual assault case. Okay, so there's some ideas from Debbie in Michigan too, Cora, about an approach that they took there. So we don't lose this one, Marnie, do you want to go back to that very first question we got, or did you have something you wanted to wrap up on this one?
Yes. Just back to Cora's comment that she just made about VOCA. So there's two, you all might know this because probably y'all are VOCA administrators, or many of you are, but in case any of you aren't, there's two different VOCA funding streams. There's the VOCA victim assistance and the VOCA victims comp. So like what Debbie's talking about here is victims comp, and Michigan, I think, is not the only state that did that. And what she has there is what I was talking about earlier, that under the federal requirements for VOCA, you're allowed to do that, to waive law enforcement requirements when the victim comes for a forensic exam. That basically that act of getting the forensic exam counts. For victims assistance, it feels recent to me, but it was actually not that recent. So OVC issued regulations right around the same time that we updated the STOP regulations. And so they address in that regulation the question of, can you use VOCA assistance for forensic exams? And I am not the VOCA expert, so talk to your VOCA administrator if this is not you, or to your grant manager at OVC. But my recollection, because that one I don't have printed out and handy like I do mine, is that it's definitely allowable. I'm 100% confident of that, but there's some caveat to the effect of, if there are not other funds available to pay for it. And so that what Cora was describing is exactly that kind of situation. Like comp can't pay for it because under our comp program, they have to report too quickly, and the county doesn't pay for it under their regulations. So there's this little gap that we're filling in with the VOCA victim assistance. And that's exactly what they had in mind with that regulatory change.
Yeah, I actually, as you were talking, I just put into the chat a federal funder facts about which programs will pay for what too. So that's the final fact sheet I just put in there. So that has some information.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Okay. So Marnie, you want to go to the very first question that we got today about law enforcement training and the proper coding for that?
Yes. And I need to follow back up with you, Cora, because I took detailed notes on your question, but I wasn't sure what you meant by coded.
Yeah, so I'm guessing their time, because now instead of, just strictly travel and appearing in person. Now there's a lot of behind the scenes administrative when they're developing the programs. And then how to track, because when they showed up in person, it was easy to get an attendance of who was attending, how many were attending, and then getting feedback on how that training was going. But now in that virtual format, it's kind of, they send it over to LET, law enforcement training. Law enforcement training prevents the virtual format, but it's hard for them to see how much participation they're getting because they're all in a classroom, or they may be doing it where they get to do it, like if they're sometime within this week, do this virtual training. So it just looks a little differently. So I think we do have to go back and ask a little bit more information, whether that goes, for the direct presentation time, whether it's admin time, so on and so forth. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yes, a little bit more. So a couple things there. This is more of a financial question than a legal question, but I'll answer it to the best of my ability, which is that usually these kinds of things, the main thing to keep in mind is that it should be consistent across all the funding sources. So if they keep track of time a certain way for their VAWA grant, but they get paid double overtime for their VOCA grant, that's a problem. For the same law enforcement training, and a officer gets paid double overtime for taking our training, but not when they take other trainings, that kind of thing. That it should be, however online training is treated, it should be treated the same way. In terms of how do you track, like more from a monitoring perspective of, did people really take this training? Was it really useful? I think those are the kinds of things you can build into the online training platform. For example, so that there are ways to design it so that like you can't just skip through it, for example, so that you have to actually at least play the videos, although you can't ensure that they were actually watching, obviously, and that they have like little tests and quizzes throughout which helps make sure they were paying attention. So that's about all I can think of.
I have learned doing some statewide trainings too. You might have seen this. There are some platforms like WebEx, and we do this through a university, where they can actually track who is present the whole time, and you don't get a certificate unless, again, at least your computer was on that whole time. You don't get a certificate for attendance unless you've actually been there, and they can track how long you've been logged in. So there are some ways to do it. Okay, great. Any other questions or follow-ups around that issue? Any other questions that have come to mind since we've started talking? And I was going to say, any more questions about forensic exams? Well, let's talk a little bit, Marnie. You started in your opening a little bit addressing the issues around COVID. And I wonder if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about OVW's thinking around 2022 plans. That's when they're going to be due next. And, the world's turned upside down since the last time. So what is the thinking? Are there priority areas? Are there things that OVW is looking at? What kind of assistance is out there for people? Why don't you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
So a few things. One, our office priorities change every year typically. And right now, as I'm sure you all know, we're having a transition of leadership. And so the new administration is going to come in and they're going to have their own priorities. I suspect that violence against women overall is going to be a pretty significant priority for the new administration. And in fact, they have stuff out there on the website about what their priorities are on violence against women, if you're curious to look at them. So time is going to tell what happens by then. In terms of your implementation plans, we are expecting that we have not had any discussions about extending it any further. So we are expecting that in 2022, everyone will be able to turn in their implementation plans on time. We're anticipating that you're all working on them on an ongoing basis. And as I mentioned, what that looks like, I'm sure, is different than what you had in mind back in hopefully 2017 or 2018 when you started the planning process. That is the expectation. If you have questions or specific concerns around that, excuse me, feel free to email me or your grant manager, and we're happy to help you out. But also, like, my biggest pitch on that is Mary Seifman and your friends at Also, who have lots of resources already available. And I think they're working on even more resources and are always there to help. I know last time around, there were many states that they were helpful with in terms of just, they can strategize with you on your planning process, on how to get people together, how to get the right people to the table. Because I'll just make a pitch, which you've heard from me before, but one of the biggest challenges we saw with the 2017 implementation plans was the who was at the table in the planning process, both as part of the planning committee and as the bigger universe of who was consulted. And in particular, the underserved and culturally specific and tribal, a lot of times were missing or were sort of lip service, but not really, I hate to use the word legitimate, but really meaningful. That's the word I want. Meaningful consultation and discussion. And that one thing I noticed in a lot of the plans I read was that the state administrator would do a fantastic job on the section where they talk about their demographics. And so they would really describe, here's the different populations we have in the state, even though in some cases it's hard to find data, but they were able to describe, here's how we know that we have a lot of, whatever population. And so then my next thing is to look like, okay, you say you have a significant elderly population in Florida. So who's on your planning committee and in your bigger consultation representing the elder victims and elder population? You have a lot of migrant farm workers in your state. Okay, do you have any migrant farm worker organizations or Latina organizations or other organizations that work with or represent that particular demographic? That's the kind of thing we're looking for. And so if you haven't already, please put some thought to who's missing from your table. And again, Mary, I apologize if I'm hyping you where I shouldn't, but Mary and your team at Also can help you with this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Thanks, Marnie. No, not hyping too much at all. We have the time and resources and an amazing cadre of consultants too. Robin's one of them. We also work closely with Olga Trujillo, Dr. Quinette Walton. If any of you, and Dr. Boomy, if any of you joined our recent set of sort of mini workshops on domestic violence homicide reduction, we talked a lot about community engagement. So engaging with those communities so you can bring them to the table, learn about survivor experiences from survivors who identify as members of particular communities, and then using, first of all, getting the qualitative data together and using it to make decisions about your priorities, your goals, your objectives, and your activities. So I think that one of the things probably that OVW would want to see is a line that you can draw between what you learned in your data collection process, and that means quantitative as well as qualitative, and what you propose to do with your STOP funds and your grant making strategy that you develop as a result of all of that information and the input that you that you get from the folks that are part of your planning committee and part of the larger consultation as well. So we've been working with some states on an individual basis. We're happy to work on questions that are big, that are small. So we've been doing all of that with folks. So happy to help however we can during that process.
And let me add too, the last program that we had with Dr. Quinette Walton was really good to talk about qualitative research. I don't know what it's going to look like, but you can probably guess that UCR data and some of the other data sources that we've been relying on are going to be not really as reliable as they used to be since COVID hit, right? Because we know so many things are not getting reported, or they might be getting reported at different times in the pandemic's progress. And so I think that idea of the qualitative research and everything she talked about was great. And those mini programs, Mary, are you guys going to have those posted, the recordings posted? Because they went, the depth and the meaningfulness of the information there was of course useful for the homicides, but there was so much more there that you can use in any of these other things. And that just what you said, drawing that line from what you're talking about in terms of data and your priorities and how you move through and what you fund, that line just has to be so strong. And then to Marnie's point about who's at the table or who's part of that larger consultation. So are those going to be available, or are they already available online?
Yes, I'll let Courtney answer that question.
They are almost available. They should be pretty shortly here. We're just waiting on like one more to get captioned, and then they're going to be fully uploaded to our YouTube.
Yeah, so you all might have noticed that those were fully accessible workshops as well. We offered them with ASL interpretation simultaneous for all of the workshops. There was English closed captioning and simultaneous Spanish interpretation as well. And thanks to Marisol for arranging all of that and making that happen. So there is a process that we go through to get all of the transcripts and all of the different recordings put together. If I could just preview a little bit, one of those products that Marnie alluded to that we're working on is a brand new portal. It's actually really a website for STOP administrators. And so we're getting ready to get that ready for all of you guys so that you can find resources more easily. The URL will be stopgrants.org, just to make it easy for you to find what you're looking for. So we'll be sending out more information about that in the next couple of weeks.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Yeah, those are really wonderful resources. Got a couple more questions. How about if we try to get those in the next 5 minutes or so, Marnie?
Okay, let's go.
Okay, so this is going back, from the profound to the mundane here, but will match waivers continue to be more flexible under COVID rules in 2021?
Probably not. Because
okay.
there were flexibilities there was a whole OMB directive around creating flexibilities, and it was sort of a one-time thing. So barring anything else coming out of OMB, I am doubtful.
Okay. All right, heads up around that then. So looking at the OVW implementation plan checklist, a minimum number of entities must be involved in the planning committee and the larger consultation. Is it okay to invite additional entities to the table, and how do you make decisions about who to invite? Now, you talked about that a little bit already. So, invite people that your data is reflecting and that would be a priority area. And what is the requirement for including tribes? So is there a floor or a ceiling here on who you get involved in your process? And what about tribes? And you got about 4 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to make it fast. So under the statute and regulations, there's certain minimum people that have to be part of the planning committee. And that's your coalitions, state domestic violence and sexual assault or dual coalition, law enforcement, prosecution, courts. And for each of those, it could be like a random law enforcement department, or it could be a state law enforcement entity, and the same thing for prosecution and courts. Then representatives from tribes, tribal organizations, or tribal coalitions. I'm going to come back to that one. And then population-specific organizations representing the most significant underserved populations and culturally specific populations other than tribes, because those are dealt with separately. And again, I'm going to get to that. So that's that link that I'm talking about, culturally specific and underserved, most significant. So what is the most significant? I think that we address this in the regulations somewhere. But basically, it's not just about how many people do you have. So it's not just straight up demographics, but also, are they underserved? Like, are their needs being met? So looking at populations that have particular barriers to receiving services, regardless of, you know, other things you might be looking at. But so that's one of the factors in determining, is it significant, is both how many of them are there, but also how are their needs being met? What are the barriers to their needs being met? That kind of analysis. And so then, as I said, starting point is that demographic. So if you have, you know, certain populations underserved or culturally specific in your demographics, they should be reflected in your consultation, whether in the planning committee or in the bigger consultation. For tribes, you need to consult every single state. Oh, thank you, Mary. You are so brilliant. You need to consult every single tribe, state and federally recognized, in your state as part of the broader consultation. In terms of the planning committee, it needs to be representative. If you have a tribal coalition, I think they're very useful at helping represent tribes, helping bring tribes to the table. Some states have like a tribal liaison position in the state government, and there were a couple of states that tried to use that position in their planning committee for 2017, and we had to reject that because that's a state government employee. They do not represent tribes or tribal organizations. They can help you identify who are the tribes, who are the tribal organizations in your state, but they cannot be the representative of tribes on your committee. Some states also have like tribal health consortia. Those kinds of organizations can be tribal organizations on the planning committee. But that's kind of the short form. You're muted, Robin.
Thank you. So there's really no limit on how many. It's really a matter of how you can stay functional when you're doing this work too. I mean, you have to be careful around that, and again, be thoughtful about who's at the table and with the admonitions that you have. You know, a state employee works for the state, is not a tribal representative as contemplated here. So so that's great.
Right.
Well,
and I will say, you don't necessarily have to have two separate processes, particularly for the really small states. There were some really small states that said, we don't have a separate committee and a bigger consultation because everyone who needs to be consulted is at the table and is on the committee. And of course you can do that. You know, if you're California or Florida or Texas, you probably can't do that because you just have, it would be too unwieldy. But if you're Rhode Island, Vermont, North Dakota, that might be a completely appropriate option.
very good. Okay, well, we have reached 6 o'clock. We're 1 minute after, actually. So, so let me thank Marnie very much for your time and expertise. That was great. It was extremely informative and a great, you know, laying of the foundation as well as refreshers. Yes, clap. Mary, thank you for all of your support in the chat. It's awesome. All the links are right there for you all to grab and look at later. Let me mention that in terms of these clinics, that this is the last one for 2020. So, so we wish you a very happy holiday and thank you so much for coming today. The next one is going to be on January 11th. Is that right? Do I have that? Okay, good. and we're kind of looking at exploring tribal issues. Please keep in mind, if you have any topics you'd like us to explore, if you have an expert you'd like, to be part of this, let us know that. It would be great to hear from you. And also we'd love to know, and this is kind of an ask that we did the last time, but we're trying to put together a list of sort of promising practices that are out there. I know a lot of you fund a lot of different programs. And if you have some funded programs that you're particularly impressed by, that you know their work is strong, and that you think they could be helpful to other states to know about what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they're doing that with STOP funds, we'd like to know that as well. And Courtney has helped put it together, a little survey of us trying to figure that out from you. But it would be really good. I think every time we've gotten together, Mary and Marnie, you might remember, and Marisol, we really did have a lot of learning happen when you all get to share with each other about, especially about programs that are great. So think about that. Before you got on, we talked about January is trafficking as well as stalking awareness month, human trafficking prevention and awareness, and stalking awareness month. So if you all want to put something together for your states, know that that's coming up. Okay, anything else, Mary, also to talk about before we clear out here?
No, just keep your eyes open for information about that new portal, and one other, really big new resource for you guys as well.
Excellent. All right. Happy holidays, everyone.
See you in 2021.
See you in 21. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.